In this video, I will show you how to install Android Studio on Windows. Although I'm Linux, I will use VirtualBox to show you how to install Android Studio on Windows. I have Windows running in VirtualBox and I'm gonna maximize its size. The first thing you will want to do on Windows in order to run Android Studio is installing JDK or Java Development Kit. In fact, what Android Studio needs to run is a Java runtime environment. So at least you will need a JRE installed on your system. You can use different versions of JRE that are available on the internet, for example from Oracle or from other sources. I'm gonna use the Red Hat version of OpenJDK, which is free to download from developers.redhat.com. You can find it by searching on Google for Red Hat OpenJDK, and then you will land on this page and you will find the JRE installer for Windows. I'm using Windows 64-bit, so I have to use JRE 11 Windows 64-bit. I have already downloaded it and installed it on my system, so I will not download it again. And the next step is going to developer.android.com/studio/preview. On that page, you will find the latest Canary version of Android Studio. Since I'm browsing the website on Windows, it automatically displays the Windows version for me, the link to the Windows version. So I can select to download it from this link, or I can select more downloads to see all the different archives and all different versions that are available. By selecting that, in fact, I can see the installer version versus the zip versions of the IDE, and I have the option to select one of them to download. There's a button to agree to the terms. I agree to the terms, and then different versions are displayed with the latest version on the top. Android Studio Arctic Fox Canary 8. You can see that we have installers and also zip files. For Windows, I recommend using the installer version because it is easier to install and get started with. So all you have to do is click this link and it will start downloading. Also, since the file size is a little bit big, about 1 GB in size, I recommend using a download manager so that in case something happens with your internet connection, you don't lose the part of the file that you have already downloaded, and you can resume the download later on. I have already downloaded it using free download manager, and I have Android Studio installer on my downloads folder. So I go to my downloads folder, I press the Windows button and E to open Windows Explorer, and then I go to my downloads folder, and as I told you, I have already installed Java 11 OpenJDK from Red Hat, so I don't need to install it again. But now I will install Android Studio from its installer file. So I open it. I recommend running Android Studio as administrator when you want to install it, so that later on you don't face problems with permission or accessing directories, especially when working with the SDK and saving SDK files. Run as administrator. It might take several seconds to evaluate the installer. Yes. Verifying installer. I press next. In addition to Android Studio, also Android Virtual Device is being installed. Since I'm on VirtualBox, I don't need to enable Android Virtual Device because it will be difficult to launch Android applications from a virtual environment and create a virtual device there. However, if you are on a normal PC, you can leave this option checked in order to have Android Virtual Device installed along with Android Studio. I press next. I accept the location for Android Studio installation and press next. Install. We wait until Android Studio is completely installed. Let's get these windows out of the way. I'm gonna scroll down the screen for Windows so that I can see the start menu. Alright, the installation is complete and I press next. And Start Android Studio is selected by default. I leave it unchanged and press finish to let Android Studio launch for the first time. We don't have a previous version of Android Studio, so we don't import any settings. I press OK. Alright, there's a prompt from Android Studio to allow data sharing to improve Android Studio. I select to share some data, some diagnostic data with Android team by selecting send usage statistics to Google. You can opt out of it by selecting don't send. One of the important steps in setting up Android Studio on Windows is setting up the SDK or software development kit for Android. If it is the first time that you are running Android Studio on Windows, you will be shown this window that guides you through the steps required to set up the SDK. I press next. There's an option for standard installation of the SDK. If it's your first time that you are installing Android Studio, it's better to go ahead by selecting the standard option. But if you want to have more control over what is installed and what is not installed, you can select custom. I select custom, press next. I'm asked what is the location of the JRE for Android Studio. Note that we have installed Red Hat OpenJDK on our system. So we have a version of JRE installed on our system. But there's also an embedded JRE inside Android Studio, the installer versions that you can use so that you don't have to necessarily have JRE installed beforehand. So now we have two versions of JRE. In fact, I can enter the path to the Red Hat JDK that I have installed on my system, and it is in the C directory. Red Hat Java 11. I can use this path and enter it here, but it's safe often to use the embedded JRE from Android Studio itself. So I don't change this and press next. In fact, it's a very good option in Android Studio that it gives you an embedded JDK so that you don't have to install JDK by yourself and set up the environment variables for Java Home and the path. I press next by after selecting the theme. After choosing the theme, I leave it as the dark theme because I'm a fan of the dark theme. I press next, and on this page you will need to make some selections if required, if you want to customize the installation. For example, do you want to install the virtual device? No, we don't want to install, so we unselect it, we uncheck this option because I'm already on a virtual environment and I don't want to run and create a virtual device in this environment. But on your system, I recommend that you install that if you have a decent and strong system. Also, performance, Intel HacksM, this is also related to virtualization. I don't want to do that. I uncheck it, but you should select it. And this option and this option, Android SDK and API 30, the latest version, the latest stable API of Android, are mandatory, so you cannot uncheck them. I leave them selected and press next. Also make sure that you agree to the path that is selected by Android Studio for your SDK installation. I recommend choosing a path that is straightforward and easy to find, like one of your drives. I change it to, for example, C Android SDK. And since the folder is not already there, I will need to create it by selecting this button, new folder, Android SDK. You can name the folder whatever you are comfortable with. Okay. I select OK. Let's wait for Android Studio to see if it likes the new path. It likes it. I press next. And I press finish and wait for these components to be downloaded and installed in the SDK path that I just specified. So we'll have to wait for these downloads to take place and complete. Alright, the SDK components have been installed. I press finish. And now Android Studio is ready to use. Great. We can press new project to create new projects in Android Studio and start our Android development journey.